Hey, I'm Brian Van, SportbikeTrackGear.com. Today we're gonna break down the M4 full exhaust install on a 2021 Yamaha MT-09. This is an all-new system for the 2021 MT-09 developed by M4. I want to give you a little breakdown before we dive into the actual install itself. Good friends with the owners over there. We sell a lot of M4. It's a brand we're proud to offer, handmade right here in the United States of America, in the great state of Texas. What Kyle wanted to do with this is he wanted to get an exhaust system, right? Because this is not a race bike. This is a street bike. So he wanted to develop a system that looked kick-ass with a nice shorty look, because remember, this bike comes stock with that gigantic stainless steel underslung muffler with the two exits down at the ground, right? So he wanted to stay true to that real clean look, go with a shorty cam, but he also felt that ceramic coating, this is a black ceramic coat on the headers, the pre-muffler, and the secondary muffler, that really looks great on the bike. Instead of just having a standard stainless steel or a titanium look, right, this matches the bike and it looks super bitchin'. Some people that have seen photos of this system assumed initially that this is a catalyst of some sort. This system is designed, of course, for closed course operation, you know, because it does involve removing the exhaust emission system component there. This is a pre-muffler. Right? This secondary muffler is so short it's not able to control the sound output properly, right? The bike's just simply too loud with just that. So he designed the system to use, these are two full mufflers, and it really gets you a good clean exhaust note that is quiet enough that you're not going to have problems riding this around anywhere, but it sounds sporty enough to get you that deep sound that we all so much desire. There is also a quiet insert that's available for this, and it's sold separate. As we go through the video, Lucas is going to show you what it sounded like with the stock exhaust, what it sounded like with the full system and no insert, and then with the insert. What we found kind of surprising is with the insert, it quieted it down just a touch, but it sounded a little bit deeper, which is a sound that some people might actually desire. So I'd strongly encourage that if this is something you're interested in for your bike, that you take a look at those clips, listen to those closely, and you might find right out of the gate, you might be like, man, I think I want to get that insert and put it in there because it sounded really bitchin'. Okay, so we still have the OEM system on the bike. We're going to start it up now. The motor is, of course, already warm. We're going to give you an opportunity to benchmark the OEM exhaust note. Pretty much like every other OEM exhaust note, quiet and boring. Okay, we started the bike, we've warmed the motor, we're ready to rev it. We're going to do this two ways. We're going to do this with a quiet insert install and without. The first is going to be no quiet insert. That sounds a whole hell of a lot better than the stock does. And I have to tell you, I think I agree with what they did by using the two muffler instead of just the single. That's a good clean exhaust note, but it's not overbearing. It's also important to remember we're inside of a building right now, you know, so it does sound a little bit different outside than what you're hearing right now. Okay, now I've installed the M4 quiet insert. This is sold separate, not included with the system. I installed it. It goes right here in the back of the secondary muffler, and listen to the difference in the exhaust note. I would say it sounds a little bit quieter, but it also sounds a little bit deeper. A couple of highlights through this install. And, you know, as mechanics, we all have our own process, right? Pretty experienced. The guys down there at M4 are pretty experienced as well. What I felt was most appropriate on this bike during the assembly was to get the headers installed. They come as one piece right to this point. They're all welded together, right? To get the headers fully installed and the flange nuts torqued out. We're going to show you how to do that in this video. And then from there, I then slid on, and we showed you all this, I then slid on the secondary muffler very carefully, worked that into position. Once we got through that, you know, and you're going to see all this, we work in the canister strap back here, secondary muffler install. In the instructions that came with the exhaust when we got it, and this could be completely changed by the time you get your system because there's a possibility they may alter their instructions. It showed, if you want to come back here, Lucas, it showed the mounting tab for the secondary muffler being inboard of this bracket that they supply. Okay, you replace an Oem bracket that's there with the one M4 supplies. And what we found is it was a little closer to the swing arm than we really liked, okay? So what I did is I just quickly removed the bracket, flip-flopped it, and allowed the secondary canister tab to ride outboard of that bracket. It solved any clearance issues that we had, right? That is, I think, going to be the right way for most people. You know, this is an aftermarket part. You know, you're installing it on a brand new motorcycle, and you know, things do move around a little bit, so it is possible maybe you could get the result that you need on the inboard side of that bracket, but I really feel like the outboard was most appropriate. It certainly worked out best for us. As I'm going to show you throughout this video, I also believe that removing this rear set, and what I did is I took out these two mount bolts, I used two long cable ties, and I secured it to the passenger peg up here so it's just out of the way. That opens this whole area up right here and allows you to access the bracket much easier, and also gives you more room to slide on this secondary can without scratching anything or damaging anything. Lucas is going to show you the whole install now, and always remember, if you have any questions, leave those in the comment section of the video. All right, here we go, 2021 MT-09 exhaust removal and install. We're going to start by removing the exhaust system. We ran the bike for quite a while so we could rev it up for you guys so you could hear the note, and we had to let it sit and cool down. We're going to begin this process over here on this side, Lucas, by exposing the O2 sensor wiring. You need to remove the shroud on the left side of the radiator. There are two 4mm internal hex fasteners back here on the guard, and then there are two absolute pain in the ass clips that I already took off. I took these off camera while we were letting the bike cool down. I'm going to show you these right now, and I'm going to share with you how much they suck, okay? These are probably literally 50 cents a piece if you had new ones. In a perfect world, you put a Phillips screwdriver in there and you turn it counterclockwise and it comes out. Well, guess what? These don't usually work that way. A great way to get these apart is to get something like this pick that you see right here, and when it is collapsed, you push it in between the two pieces and you lift up to pull the center outward. Once you get it out far enough, slide a pair of needle nose pliers under there and pull it out the rest of the way so it allows the sides of the clip to compress against each other so you can remove them. I'm not going to show you that because, you know, I sat there for a couple of minutes because this isn't my bike, this is Joe's bike. I didn't want to break those clips. So I sat there and fiddled with them to get them out. Expect to spend a couple of minutes on those clips when you're disassembling the system. With the M4 system, you're going to need to disconnect the O2 sensor, right? Around the lower radiator hose here, there was a cable tie. Be very careful when you're cutting that off, okay? You want to make sure you don't have the edges of your side cutters touching the hose at all, right? You put even just a small hole in that hose and you're going to have a big problem. Go ahead and disconnect your exhaust sensor. 17mm wrench. The M4 system comes with a wiring harness extension for the exhaust sensor. This is going to be relocated to a different spot. One of the comments that Joe made was, you know, the way Yamaha really has this kind of hanging out in the front, it seems like it's pretty vulnerable, so we'll see the difference in position once we install the system on the bike. So go ahead and get your exhaust sensor off. While you're up here, let's go ahead and remove the exhaust flange nuts. My expectations are, I took a pretty good look at this. I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to do this without pulling the radiator. There appears to be plenty of room here. This is the boring part. This is like watching paint dry on a fence. Slide that flange down. Thus far, the access has been pretty good. I mean, this is, might need to go to the other side now. Okay, 4 down, 2 to go. Before you take off the very last bolt, you want to be ready to support the system. I don't know how much it's going to want to dip down in the front. You want to be really careful with your radiator. The last thing you want to do is contact and damage the radiator. Okay, now we're on the other side. Really important, okay? Before you just take all the exhaust flange nuts off, that you're ready to support the system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of the last 2 off, and then I'm going to be ready to support this system as I start to loosen and remove the very final bolt. The last thing you want to have happen is this thing to swing into the radiator, catch and damage it, right? Especially when it's Joe's motorcycle and not mine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the most easily accessible exhaust flange nut for the last one. Which is going to be the outward most. Okay, going to go ahead and just break loose the mounts on both sides. There's one here on the right side, and there is one over here on the left. I just cracked those loose. Now we'll come over to the sponge. Notice I've got my left hand underneath the system supporting it right now. Get the flange to come off the exhaust studs. Now let's see what it wants to do here. I've got the center flange is still on the studs. We'll get that off of there. It looks like the radiator support bracket right here in the center is going to prevent the exhaust flange from coming all the way off the stud. So we're going to have to backtrack here just a little bit. I'm going to put this flange back up. I'm going to put a nut on it to hold it in place, and we're going to grab some other tools, and we're going to get that center support bracket for the radiator off. Okay, so what we need to do is, if you look right in here, there is a 10mm silver bolt head that's holding that bracket on. There's a slip fit at the bottom of the radiator and what appears to be just the one fastener up here at the top. It's a pretty tight angle. So what I'm going to use to get in there is I'm going to use a 3/8 universal. And the angle is still, even with that, it's pretty severe. Okay, so get that up into position. That broke loose. Now there is a possibility loosening it might be enough. So we'll start with that. If we're able to do it without completely removing the bolt, that means that we don't have to wedge our hand up in there to get that sucker back in, which should be good. All right, you can see I'm putting just a little bit of pressure on the bracket right now. And I've gotten the flange to slide down. Still holding the flange up. And what I'm going to do now, just for access, is I'm just going to go ahead and remove the bracket. I think ultimately that's going to be the best choice. Probably going to take a couple of minutes to get that back in there, but I think in the end it's going to be worth that investment of time, because this is just really going to open this area up for us quite a bit. I think it's not only going to make removal of the system easier and possible, but it's also going to make installing the new system a whole hell of a lot easier. So there we have that. And let's go ahead and get this nut back off. Okay, now let's see how much this wants to come down. I'm gonna have to retrieve all that stuff that's flying all over the shop right now. I'm gonna hold the system right here. go ahead and remove that the rest of the way. I'm going to wiggle it around to make sure that when I go to transition to the other side, this thing's just not going to smash into the radiator. We're good, it's still supported enough. There is our other nut. Go ahead and support the system right here. Let's remove that last mount bolt. And just kind of rotate the system right out of there. Okay, we've got the entire system off. We weighed the OEM system and we weighed the complete, and Joe made sure we weighed all the little pieces, the hardware that's going to go with it too, right? The OEM system weighed 15 pounds, 10 ounces. The M4 system weighs 10 pounds, 13 ounces. You're basically going to enjoy a 5-pound weight savings with the install of the system. We've got all of our exhaust gaskets right here. I've inspected those. They're all completely reusable. I've installed a lot of systems over the years, and I have actually never had to replace the gaskets when replacing the system. So you should expect to be able to use those. I'm going to show you a little trick when we go through the assembly, installing the header on the bike to help hold those in place. The system is going to be supported by some new brackets that were engineered by our good friends at M4. In order to install those, you're going to need to remove the OEM bracket right here. Got a 14. And this is just a bolt here in the back. And then on this side, right, we have a nut, and full disclosure, okay? It took Joe and I to get this off. I couldn't do that by myself. We used a wrench on the right side of the bike, and on the left side, I had a 6-inch extension with a swivel socket. And we definitely had to put some pressure on it to get it off. That's a super long bolt that passes all the way through the casting. Okay, it's kind of hollowed out in the center, you'll be able to see that. So what I want you to expect there is I want you to expect that to be really tight, and when you go to break it loose, you're gonna feel it's gonna take a lot of torque to get that done. So what you see here right now, that's 100% bullshit, right? I already had that loose. I could have made myself look real amazing and not said anything, and you'd be like, oh, you just get that off that easy and it takes all this torque? Instead, I'll tell you the truth. So we're going to go ahead and pull this off. We could be a little more scientific and weigh this and then do a little quick calculation to see exactly where we are at the weight savings. Not going to make much of a difference. Okay, so the brackets that are supplied and the instructions that are included are right here, basically all pictures. Right? Super simple. The way this is going to go on is this gets installed right like this. And then this bracket here gets installed right there. So you're replacing that OEM bracket completely. There's a canister strap that's supplied with the system that's going to go around the pre-muffler. And we're going to explain all that when we do the install here of the system. You know, you initially, and notice I'm not going to tighten that. See that? All right. Before I tighten that down, I want to have the opportunity to get the system mocked up and make sure that we get that in the best possible position. So we're just going to run that down by hand for now, and then we'll get the system installed, and then, of course, as we complete the project, I'll get that all torqued down. The header pipe comes with the flanges wired in place. And just grab that off the bench over here. Okay, these were all wired up here. I think there's probably a couple of reasons for that. Reason one is probably to hold the flanges up in the place where they're going to live once the system's installed, so when they ceramic coat the pipe, right, that you're not going to see anything that wasn't coated. And two, I think they leave them on there so they're not banging around while the package is being shipped. I've already lined this up with the bike. This looks like it's going to install really easily, right? The fit looks to be really good because you'll note all these are welded into place right here into the collector. What we're going to do now is we're just going to carefully set that down so we don't scratch it. We're going to put a little grease on the edges of these gaskets to hold them in place. It really doesn't take a lot to hold the gasket in position, and the grease is completely safe to use because once it gets good and hot, it's just going to go away. All right, when we come back, the gaskets are going to be in place, and we're going to get that header installed. Okay, gaskets are in place. Hopefully it stays that way, right? Sometimes they do fall back out and you got to reposition stuff. Now we're going to go ahead and let's get our header up into position. We've got the pipe up into position, and you know, this is a spot where if you have a second set of hands, it can be really beneficial. For the purpose of this video, we just don't have that, so it's going to be just me here. There'll be probably some spots where you're going to be like, man, this guy's pretty uncoordinated. Okay, that'll be enough to support our pipe for a second. I'm going to go over to the other side. And throughout this process too, you want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on your gaskets, okay? I can see both of them clearly right now. They're still, or all three, they're still in position. Everything looks great. And let's get the one that's a little more inboard. It always feels good when you get all those on there, not gonna lie. Okay, now, when you are installing the flange nuts for the header, this is super important, right? Probably the most important advice I can give you for this install, it's all gonna be right here. You wanna make sure, number one, that these are even, okay? You don't wanna run one down more than another. So we're going to start them by hand. Just keep a really close eye. Notice I'm just going kind of back and forth here. There is zero torque on that right now. So when we come back, I'm going to have all these run down by hand and get us to a point where we're ready to apply some torque to the flange bolts. Okay, so before we put any torque to it, right, these have only been tightened down by hand now. But what I want to do is I want to kind of illustrate how even the amount of exposed exhaust stud from one side of the flange to the other is. Super important you start off like that. And I'd also like to point out, if you look at those flanges, you're going to notice they're not super thick. They don't need to be. When you tighten these down, it's really important that you tighten them just to the point where it's starting to really put some pressure on the flange, but you don't want to distort and bend the shit out of the flange. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with just this little stubby little 3/8 ratchet, right? Because we don't need a lot of torque. Oops, got the wrong extension. And I'm going to work from one side to the other on each flange like this. Just a little bit, right? Trying to keep it as even as possible. So we're just going to work back and forth, and I'm going to do this on each of the 3 flanges. When I'm done, I'll probably take the full-size ratchet and apply just a little additional torque, and then I have a little trick to ensure that these nuts never fall off that I'll show you before we install the rest of the system. Okay, if you look inside the hole, you'll see we've got this all torqued down, everything's tight, and you're going to notice there is a little dab of high-temp orange silicone on each one of the exhaust studs, the exposed portion of the studs. Once you've got this all torqued down nice and even, putting that there, I want you to think of that as kind of, it's like Loctite, it's like a safety, right? If in fact that nut were ever to make its way loose, it's not going to just spin off and you're not going to have yourself in a situation where you're running open headers at the cylinder head. Next up, we need to reinstall the radiator, the lower radiator mount bracket. Right, I'm sure this is going to be just awesome. Right, let's go ahead and get that tucked up in there. Another real key to an exhaust install full system is before you start the bike, right, which is that magic moment that we're all anticipating when you're doing this project. Make sure you wipe the system down and get it perfectly clean before you start the pipe and put heat into it. The reason behind that is you can burn fingerprints in. The ceramic coated stuff resists that much more and it's not quite as important, but still, before we start this bike, I'm going to go through and wipe this down. Okay, now we've got the header on, header's tight, we've got that radiator mount back on there, we are ready to move forward or backwards. Real important that I stress the fact this is a second muffler, okay? This system actually has 2 mufflers on it. They did that purposely at M4 because they wanted to come up with a kick-ass shorty canister design. If you take and you run a straight pipe off the header into this muffler, you're going to end up with a finished product that's really loud, along with the intake noise that this bike was designed to have so it sounds bitchin'. Right? The bike is going to be too loud to ride. Through the neighborhoods, cruising on the freeway, it's just not going to be pleasant. M4 wanted to make sure that they came up with a finished product that delivered a good riding experience to a good exhaust note, but a good riding experience. Kyle was telling me that, when they first introduced this system just a couple weeks ago, that some people thought this was a catalyst. This is not, in fact, a catalyst. Right? Of course, Joe is going to be riding this motorcycle on the racetrack, right? So it's going to be okay that we've altered the admissions because it's closed course operation. If you look at this, this is literally a second exhaust can. We're going to go ahead now and we're going to slide this onto our header. I'm going to try and do this just in small movements here. This is a pretty tight, slick fit. There are no exhaust springs used with this system. I'll get that seated all the way. I'm supporting the header. pushing forward on the back of the muffler and wiggling, and you can feel right there is where it stopped. We've got our bracketry in place. Remember, I left that just a little bit loose. That's on purpose. Okay. Now let's grab, God, this thing is just bitching. I love the logo that he did here too. Little American flag down there at the bottom. Let's go ahead and slide this in place. I think you can see it's kind of important that you leave everything loose so there is a little bit of movement in it. And we want to position this so that the exhaust bracket that they supplied is going to be actually on the outside of the canister mount. So slide that back, rotate that a little bit. And what I think I'm going to do to gain just a little more room here, I'm going to take that bracket off, and then I'm going to reinstall the bracket after. One of the things that you want to be cognizant of too is you don't want to be scratching all this up, obviously, because it looks great during the install, and that's the reason that I pulled it off. I might have been able to get that slid on and into position, but it just felt like there was going to be some contact there, and I didn't want to scratch the pieces. Kind of the same deal here. A little pressure, kind of wiggle it. Okay, I think we're pretty close. Let's see where it is in relation to the bracket. Looks like we've got to go probably another ½ inch or so. Okay, the bike looks a little bit different than when we left you. I decided that it would be best to remove the rear set from the bike. I didn't disconnect anything, I just took the 2 mount bolts. I removed them, took 2 long cable ties, and temporarily secured it up around the passenger foot peg. This is really going to open this whole area up right here to give us the access that is required to get this all installed and get a good final result. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take the canister strap. This goes around the pre-muffler. It also has a rubber insert that you need to install into the strap. Make sure you have that all lined up appropriately. Let's go ahead and get that into position, and that, I feel, what I just showed you right there is going to be the easiest way to get that in there. Slide it backwards just a little bit. This is a little bit of a journey, you know. This is a brand new system. This is obviously the first time I've installed it. And there aren't really many of these that are out in the market yet. I think, you know, they just finished this. What I'm going to do is push that through. They just finished this system a short period ago, so brand new. What I am going to do here is I'm going to put a bit of Loctite on this nut. I think that's appropriate. leave that a little bit loose so we can move this all around. Okay, and now what I need to do is reach my arm around under the bike. Get that bolt all lined up. I'm going to push that back through this bracket, like so. Okay, Lucas, I need you to push that in.
This here?
Yep. Push inward. There you go. All right, I just used my cameraman as a second set of hands to help get that done. Now that we have that in position, once again, everything is left loose. It's important that you don't tighten anything up, right? Our exhaust flange bolts are tight, and that is all. Let's go ahead and get our bracket into position here. Looks like from the factory there was a little bit of blue on this, so we'll go ahead and redo that. Just get that started. Now I want to come back here, take a look at how all this is going to come together. I like what I see so far, so we'll go ahead and we'll begin to run some of these fasteners down back here. Moving the rear set out of the way, I'll tell you right now, is something that I highly recommend that you do. That really opened everything up back here quite nicely. It was literally a game changer. And you can see now this is all just starting to really just come together. It's not going to take very much pressure at all. Get a little more heavy duty here at the back. There are no springs on this system. Right, this is all held together and held in place by this rearward-most mount, as well as the canister strap up here. I'm gonna go ahead and get that into a nice symmetrical position. And now we're ready to go ahead and start torquing some of this down. These are not the kind of fasteners that I'm going to pull a torque wrench out for. I know that makes some people concerned. If you're not comfortable tightening a fastener of this nature without using a torque wrench, I strongly encourage that you go ahead and do some research, find the torque spec, get yourself a torque wrench. Okay, we've got Joe on the other side. He is holding the backup ratchet for this ultra long bolt. Reasonable amount of torque, we're good to go. That one's nice and tight. We're going to double check this one here at the back. That one is good. And now we're going to go ahead and move forward. With the torquing down the rearward most mount. You know, on the surface, the red Loctite might seem like overkill back here. This is the kind of fastener I just don't want to see come loose, period. Which is why I use that back there. Now we need to tighten the canister strap. All right. Got to deal with the exhaust gas sensor. The pipe is supplied with a reducer. Okay. The stock sensor is going to require the use of that reducer. The reason they send this is if you're going to use a product like an auto tune, right? You need to have the larger bung in the pipe. That is the reason that they supply the reducer. So you can use the OEM sensor if you choose to, but you're also able to, if you're going to try and achieve a higher level of tuning, you have the option to go ahead and use the larger sensor. Now we're going to go ahead and install the adapter here. I did put a little bit of anti-seize onto the large side of the adapter here where it goes into the pipe. That's just enough so that if, let's say down the road, Joe does decide to take this somewhere and they need to have access to that to get the kind of tune done that he wants to get done, they will be able to ultimately get that out. We're going to use a pair of channel locks. Just snug that up. Like so. Now we can go ahead and install the OEM exhaust sensor. This is much more tucked out of the way now as compared to the stock mounting point. Torque that down. Here is the pre-made extension that our friends from M4 include in the kit. That plugged right in. Okay, and then obviously we're going to circle back here and go ahead and secure all this and put that cover back on. Okay, there you have it. You know, it's like anything. This is an aftermarket install. This is a journey. It takes patience. You know, we went through this. All that matters is the end result. It doesn't matter how long it takes you to get it done, how fast you got it done. What matters is how good it turns out in the very end. I'm super stoked with the end result we got. Joe is digging it. It looks great. He's excited to take the bike for a ride tomorrow once he gets himself back to Pennsylvania. He's got quite a drive in front of him. You have any questions, leave those in the comment section of this video. Obviously, I installed this. If you're having any issues with your install or would just like a little additional insight, I'm always here to help you get the same result in your project I got from mine.